Welcome to the Rusted Garden. This is a three-part series all about composting. Today's episode is really about how do you use a compost tumbler to create hot compost so that in about 4 to 6 weeks you can have plenty of compost for your garden, and you can continue this throughout the entire summer. The sponsor of this video is Mantis, and this is their back porch compost tumbler. It's 5 cubic feet. It holds about 4 bushels of material, and that's plenty of material to take care of a garden my size over the summer. Before we get to that, I really want to explain to you what is the carbon-nitrogen ratio of the different things that you would put into your compost tumbler, or if you're using a compost pile, into your compost pile. And I'm going to give you a little bit of tour of different ways I'm using compost in my garden. But the primary way that I'm using it this year is with a compost tumbler. I'm going to show you how to make massive amounts of compost for free. So it's been 3 days since I shot the video. I just want to show you what's going on. It's about 65 degrees here. Thermometer is up to 90 degrees. And the compost is starting to cook. I don't know, let's see if I move some of this out of the way. See if you can, there you go. You can see some of the steam coming up from the heat. And this is completely warm all the way through. Coffee grounds from Starbucks. This is 3 bags free. It's probably 15 pounds of your nitrogen. We're going to use leaves, your carbon, and we're going to use shredded newspaper, your carbon. Let me talk a little bit about what that ratio is. Your carbon to nitrogen ratio isn't the exact amounts of 3 parts nitrogen, 6 parts carbon. It's actually the ratio of the product, and that's important to remember because when we mix these together, the ratio is going to be a little bit different. Coffee has a 20-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, the product itself. Leaves have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 60-to-1, and newspaper has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 175-to-1. When your carbon to nitrogen ratio is above 30, it's usually considered your browns, and it's considered the carbon component of your compost. When it has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 30 or less, or close to that, it's usually considered green and considered your nitrogen ratio. And that's important because your microorganisms use carbon and nitrogen to compost down and break down your materials. If you just put all this together, when we go up to the compost pile on my hill, I'll talk about cold composting. That will break down, but it's going to break down slowly over 6 months, over a year. And cold composting or slow composting is perfectly fine. You can put all your materials in a place, let them break down over 6 months, over a year, and you just keep adding to it. By using the back porch compost tumbler, we're going to do hot composting. And hot composting really breaks down things more quickly. The temperature actually can get up to 140 degrees. And the microorganisms just go crazy and quickly break down your product. And that's what I want this year. I want to be able to take care of all of this by using a compost tumbler. Now, you're mixing in a ratio of nitrogen. Coffee, although it's brown, it's considered green because it's got that 20-to-1 carbon nitrogen ratio. Your leaves and your newspapers are brown. And when you set this up, you're going to want to use 2 parts nitrogen to 1 part carbon. And you got to kind of experiment. You'll figure it out as time goes on. If you use too much nitrogen, for instance, if you put a lot of grass in there and it gets smelly and it smells bad, that's too much nitrogen. You're going to have to add in more browns, more leaves, or more newspaper. If you put in too many browns, too many leaves, too much newspaper, it's going to stay cold and it will break down, but it's going to break down slowly. So the whole idea is getting the right balance between your carbons and your nitrogens so that you get the hot composting. And basically, it's about 2 parts nitrogen to 1 part carbon. And I'll show you how we set that up in the composter. I've been composting for about 2 weeks. The other key to hot composting is your temperatures really have to be above 40 degrees. Maybe 2 weeks ago we just got out of our frost, so I'll show you that in a second. I'm also going to take you over to my compost tube that's in the ground to show you another way that you can also compost. Okay, let's take the quick tour and then we'll get to the compost tumbler and I'll show you how to set that up. This is my compost pen up on my hill. It's really all the carbons, the browns. I have tall grasses in there, leaves, sticks, pine needles, some grass that I've thrown in there. This is what I will use in my compost tumbler to fulfill the carbon needs of the tumbler so it'll get up to hot composting. Right now this is a cold compost, which means it's just going to naturally break down over 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, depending on what's going on. And you can use this, when it's ready. But I want to speed up the process. That's why you do hot composting. You could turn this area into a hot compost area where maybe I would layer the carbons, the browns, and the greens, the nitrogen in a pile over there, about a 4 foot by 4 foot pile. You're going to have to moisten it, put a tarp over it, and come and turn it. So you can kind of forego having to do all that by just using a compost tumbler. The other benefit that I really like about using a tumbler is as this breaks down naturally, when it rains, some of the nutrition is going to wash into the ground, which is fine if you get a plant here, but using the compost tumbler, all the nutrients, the N, P, K, everything you want, stays in a compost tumbler and will get right to your plants when you put it in the planting hole or when you do a side dressing. This is another way I compost. I'll link the video on how you set this up, but it's basically a tube with holes drilled in it. And I put in my organic matter from the kitchen. Of course, this could go in a tumbler. And then I put in some of the carbons. The microorganisms get their energy from carbons, and they create proteins from the nitrogen. So you want a really nice ratio. If you're using eggs, of course, just break them up. But I basically drop in my nitrogens, put in a few leaves as my carbon, and then I cap it off, keep animals and insects out. This works great, but this is not hot composting. The worms get in there, and over time it breaks down and it will take the nutrients out to the plant. So let's go back to the compost tumbler, and I'm going to show you how you can literally make massive amounts of compost. Of course, kitchen scraps are only going to have so many, but by going to Starbucks or any coffee shop, you can get pounds of coffee. Even though it's brown, it's the nitrogen component, and you're really going to be able to make tons of hot compost, quick compost in 4 to 6 weeks that you can use throughout your garden. Let's get to those ratios now. Okay, let's get to filling the compost tumbler. If you're going to get one, I highly recommend getting something about this size. Again, it's 5 cubic feet, holds 4 bushels of material, and you really want to be able to produce a lot so that you can take care of your garden over the whole season. So what I have in here now is mostly coffee grounds, pine needles that were green, my leaves, and it's cold. Now, again, we just got started. It's been about 2 weeks since this has been up and going. When I first started, it was getting hot and it was actually steaming. What I've been doing is I've been adding in more carbon, too much carbon, and as you add in more carbon, it's going to cool off. So you really want to get the right ratio of carbon to nitrogen in there, and that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to show you how to do that, and I'm going to fix this. Now, the carbon to nitrogen ratio, again, is 25 to 30 to 1 for your materials in your tumbler to be effective. I'll link my blog post that I'm doing to explain this in more detail, but basically we're going to go 2 parts greens or nitrogen, which is coffee, 1 part carbon, which is a combination of newspaper and leaves. This is something you can do for free. Of course, you can throw in your food scraps, but we're not going to eat enough to fill up 4 bushels worth of a compost tumbler regularly. So go to Starbucks. Here's what it looks like. This is your nitrogen. I'm going to put in 1 bag now to increase the nitrogen ratio to this mix that cooled off. Alright, so that's set up because I made a mistake. Now, 2 bags of your greens. This could be lawn clippings. I'm using coffee. These are equal parts, so it's 2 parts coffee. This one's moldy because it's been sitting in my house. That's perfectly fine. That's what you want. You want the soil life to start breaking this down. Break that up, and then we're going to do 1 part carbon. Now, it's hard to get the exact amount because it's not by weight, because you'd be a ton of newspaper to the weight of this coffee grounds. It's about by size. So I'm going to just put in a handful of that because I want to get the newspaper started. But this is about 1 part volume-wise right here to the 2 nitrogens of the coffee. That's all you really need to do. Now, this is what you do. You get this going, Couple of days, if it's not getting warm, add in more nitrogen, more grass clippings, more coffee, and you'll kind of figure out the right balance. If you pick up the back porch compost tumbler, which I highly recommend, it is really easy to put together. There's a video online. You're also going to get a kit. You're going to get Compost Plus, the compost maker. This will get it started. You're going to get a thermometer and a water meter just to know what the moisture level is in here. A couple handfuls of the compost starter to get the good bacteria in there, and then you just want to wet it down. You want the consistency of a wet sponge. Close it up. This locks really tightly together. This is perfect if you've got rats or animals that would get into your compost pile, especially if you're throwing in food scraps. Nothing is going to get to this. Nothing will be able to get into here. And then give it at least 5 spins once you put new material in there. You're going to want to spin this about once a day, every other day. And you just want to make sure you get all the new ingredients you add to it well mixed. Open it up as you need to, check it out, make sure the moisture level is right. And you know that the benefits of composting really go a long way for making healthier plants. They're going to be stronger, they're going to be more productive because you're using what nature intended, and that's compost. The back porch composter from Mantis is an outstanding compost tumbler. I highly recommend it. You can see everything is mixed nicely in there. The newspaper is moist. That's what you want. You can't really wring water out. Don't oversaturate it. If you want to subscribe to my channel, I'll show you how to maintain this, and we're going to take finished compost and I'll show you how I use it in the garden. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please check out my blog at www.therustedgarden.com. And I know I mentioned it, but if you've got rats, raccoons, or animals, a compost tumbler will go a long way of keeping your compost safe and not getting rodents in your area. Thanks for watching.